Hello learners, welcome to this online study session on the Bluest Eye. I, Vaishali Sharma, will be taking you through a deep thematic analysis of the novel in this particular lecture. And in this particular session, we will be talking about the black female subjectivity and the notes of history that Morrison records in her novel, The Bluest Eye. So without any further ado, let's begin. Images projected on the screen and mass-produced items curtail freedom in other, less obvious and brutal ways as well, although the effects can be due as much to what is not seen or experienced as to what is. Claudia, for example, fosters a brutal hatred for her white baby dolls, not just because they don't want or they don't look like her, but because the gift of them is supposed to replace the somehow and improve upon what she would really prefer for Christmas, that is the experience of sitting on the low stool in Big Mama's kitchen with her lap full of lilacs and listening to Big Papa play his violin for her alone. Instead of family interaction and the touching, playing and ritual storytelling that might accompany it, Claudia is supposed to pretend to be the mother of this thing, dressed in starched gauze or lace and sporting a bone-cold head. Similarly, Claudia hates Shirley Temple well enough because her socks stay up, but what really gets her is the presence in the films of Bojangles. This is the outrage, the rewriting of either a historical moment, that is the Civil War, or interpersonal relationship, an orphan child and benevolent older friend, with her part edited or bleached out so that those few images of African American life afforded space on the big screen are put there not as evidence or proof of the experience itself, but as a tactic for further erasure, denial, or revisioning of just the experience. Instead of the ideological opportune sight of an older black man soft-shoeing it and chuckling harmlessly, aimlessly with a little white girl, the world should be seeing her, Claudia, socks around her ankles, enjoying, sharing, giving a lovely dance thing with her friend, uncle, daddy, Bojangles. It does not, however, and Morrison signals the effect of these oversights of supplanting or having supplanted both one's appearance and one's history and culture repeatedly in The Bluest Eye in details of sexuality, especially women's, but as the life stories of Chloe and Soaphead indicate, not exclusively so. Mr. Henry, for example, when first moving into the McTeers' home, greets Claudia and Frida with "You must be Greta Garbo and you must be Ginger Rogers," thus reducing them to type in a kind of objectification which in part will make it easier for him later to molest Frida. He follows this greeting with a gift of money, a gesture repeated later when he wants them out of the house so he can entertain two of the more colorful members of his Bible class, China and the Maginot Line. The exchange of money and the objectification of women as types converge here in such a way as to align his interaction with the two women and with Frida and Claudia under the heading of prostitution. The incident with Mr. Henry suggests one way the mass circulation of images of femininity negatively affects women in the area of sexuality by negatively affecting the attitudes and thus behavior of the people with whom they interact. The Bluest Eye, however, documents further the effect of those images on women themselves on the level of the body and in terms of how they understand and experience their own sexuality. For Pauline, for example, sexual pleasure depends entirely on the ability to feel a power that comes from a sense of herself as desirable. In bed with Chloe, she thinks, I know he wants me to come first. Unfortunately, Pauline defines strength, beauty, and youth solely in terms she's learned from films. Thus, as the possibility of ever attaining them is foreclosed, so too is sexual pleasure. Confident that my maker will take care of me, Pauline reassures herself that it do not make no difference about this old earth, thus hoping to cash in on one dream in exchange for relinquishing another. Sexual pleasure is no longer even a consideration for Geraldine and the other sugar brown girls who have lost the dreadful funkiness of passion, of nature, of the wide range of human emotions, almost as a consequence of moving north and away from family and towns like Mobile, Akin, and Nagadoches, whose names make you think of love, if the girls themselves do not. Geraldine's desire to eschew inappropriate manifestations of Black American culture by maintaining the line between colored and nigger and thus to effect a bland respectability is connected in her portrait with a body that can give itself only sparingly and partially. She stiffens when she feels one of her paper curlers coming undone from the activity of love. She hopes he will not sweat, the damp may get into her hair. Geraldine's concern is focused on her hair, that part of her appearance which, along with her fair skin, she can control and adapt most easily to standards of white beauty. One is reminded at this point of Pauline and her Jean Horlow hairstyle, or China, who with a flick of the wrist converts herself from one feminine type to another. One minute she has the surprised eyebrows and cupid bow mouth of a starlet, the next the oriental eyebrows and evilly slashed mouth of a female fatale. Piccola, however, whose ugliness came from conviction, has no such physical qualities. Capable of altering and thus redeeming what she and her family perceive as her relentlessly and aggressively ugly appearance. Piccola, in fact, is all sign to see her body is to know already everything about her, or at least everything her culture deems important to her. The depiction of her sexuality is thus correspondingly total. Piccola gets off eating candy, nothing new here, except that for her, orgasm takes the form of a curious transmutation and ultimately transformation. She says, to eat the candy is somehow to eat the eyes, eat Mary Jane. Love Mary Jane, be Mary Jane, unquote. Unlike Claudia, who cannot yet, in the words of Suzanne Wills, imagine herself miraculously translated into the body of Shirley Temple so as to vicariously live white experience as a negation of blackness. Piccola not only can, but from this denial of self and substitution of the store-bought image, actually gets in the process 9 lovely orgasms with Mary Jane. Whatever pleasurable resources Piccola's own body may harbor are available to her now, and this at the early age of 11, only to the extent that, like her mother, she can experience them as the alienated effects of another woman's body. Most of the time, however, she cannot do this and rather not reconcile herself as her mother has to prospect of greater glory and bigger rainbows in the next world. Piccola opts instead to make a life of her own erasure and annihilation. As her parents and brother fight in the next room, she prays to God to make me disappear and then performs the meditation to do so. She squeezed her eyes shut. The inability to make her eyes go away prompts Piccola's final disappearing act. The ugliness of her entire body is dissolved in and absorbed by the blue eyes only. she and her new friend can see. Her breakdown at the end of the novel is the last in a series of instances in which boundaries marking the space between inside and outside, self and the other, sense and nonsense are broken, removed, or simply no longer perform their tasks. As the novel's perforatory Dick and Jane story turns from order to chaos with the gradual removal of punctuation and spacing, so too does the erasure of Piccola's body and sexuality lead to her madness and isolation. It seems to me that it is at this point that we can begin to make sense of Maureen's notion of disinterested violence, which she introduces first with Claudia and elaborates upon in her depiction of the three prostitutes, Chloe, and by implication the black community in Lorain, Ohio. After systematically destroying her baby dolls in order to discover the dearness, to find the beauty, the desirability that had escaped her, and then finding this tactic unproductive, transferring the same impulses to little white girls, Claudia learned how repulsive this disinterested violence was, that it was repulsive because it was disinterested. Michael Awkward argues that what Claudia feels is repulsive here is her own failure to accept without question the standards of white America. A reading which, while it has a lot of general application in the novel, seems to misdirect the focus of this passage. Claudia's self-incrimination is, it seems to me, more in response to her failure to feel enough for her white victims to have the interest that would make her actions meaningful. Willis claims that Claudia's realization that violence against white runs the risk of being disinterested suggests the white people are little more than abstractions, that all are realified subjects. What Claudia realizes is that her violence cannot help but be disinterested, since even the little girls she thinks she wants to disremember are finally only representatives to her of the system she resents and wants to dismantle. Disinterestedness then is the result of not seeing individual people and how their actions combine in ways affecting you disinterested violence, the prelude to adjustment without improvement, is possible precisely when the specificity of bodies, places and histories is erased as it is by commodity culture and those living under its aegis. Though charming in their own way, China, Poland and the Maginot Line are also condemned in the Bluest Eye for just this kind of refusal to take into account the difference and history. Except for Mary's fabled love for dewy prince, these women hated men, all men, without shame, apology, or discrimination. They abused their visitors with scorn, ground mechanical from use. Black men, white men, Puerto Ricans, Mexican, Jews, Poles, whatever, all were inadequate and weak, all came under jaundiced eyes and were the recipient of their disinterested wrath. Neither their hatred for men and the mechanical violence it spawns, nor Mary's love for Piccola, however, has much effect on their either own standing in the community or Piccola's life. Any power moves they think they are making by indiscriminately hating all men are probably negated by the fact that they do not take into account differences in race and class, factors supremely affecting their position vis-a-vis men, especially in their profession. Their kindness to Piccola is similarly disinterested, that by failing to see her and her situation clearly, the three, in the words of Michael Wallace, fail to understand victimization or the fact that she is in danger. This failure is finally the community's as a whole, a fact Morrison repeatedly suggests by illustrating the extent to which, as a group, it too has absorbed in full dominant standards of value and beauty with little or no inspection or reflection on the effects to itself or to its individual members. In her conversation with friends, Mrs. McTeer jokes about Aunt Julia still trotting up and down 16th Street talking to herself. The significance of this remark is not really apparent until the depiction of Piccola's breakdown is complete. And we are presented with a similar image of Piccola walking up and down, her head jerking to the beat of a drummer so distant only she could hear. Lorenz sees Aunt Julia as that old hag floating by in that bonnet, whom the county will not take and whom the sight of will scare the living shit out of you. One of the women attributes Aunt Julia's fate to senility, but the designation still tottering implies she has been out there a while. Their inability or refusal to make sense of her actions, to put them in context, foreshadows their eventual scapegoating of Piccola and suggests that the town has an undiagnosed and unexamined history of producing women like Piccola, that her experience and the extremity of it is not an isolated instance. Morrison characterizes Chloe's disinterestedness as the condition of being dangerously free. Free to feel whatever he felt, fear, guilt, shame, love, grief, pity, free to be tender or violent. Her depiction of him traces the source of this freedom to his loss of mother, father, community, and home, to the feeling that the history of people and events extends as far as his interest in them. Chloe was truly free. Paradoxically, this is a state that allows him to see Piccola more clearly than probably anyone else in the book, with the exception of the adult Claudia, and to love her in spite of what he sees, but does not allow him to interact with her in any form other than reactions based on what he felt at the moment. Chloe sees his daughter washing dishes and sees also in her stooped frame an accusation against him. Unlike others in town, though, he sees her young, helpless, hopeless presence and loved her enough to touch her, envelop her, give something of himself to her where no one else would. In the four examples cited above, disinterestedness is occasioned specifically by the inability to place people and events into contexts that would flesh out experience and thus make obvious the limitations of present actions or beliefs. It becomes steadily more difficult for characters in the Bluest Eye to do this because they are either separated from the supportive networks that would encourage it, and or are as a result because their placement in American culture does not sanction accurate representations of what that context would be. The result: community of individuals who are at times painfully alienated from each other as each is divided within him or herself. Piccola's split consciousness at the end of the novel is a literal representation of this doubleness. It affects other characters also as distortions or denials of self, but denials and distortions approved and fostered in proper iconographic representations. An explicit formal project of the Bluest Eye, then, is to rewrite the specific stories, histories, and bodies of African American which are quickly being made invisible in commodity culture and which, if written, will make disinterestedness and its unproductive or damaging results impossible. Morrison acknowledges this project in so many words when she says she wrote The Bluest Eye because she wanted to read the story it would tell. The novel's shifting focus and point of view, its willingness to let different people speak and not to reconcile contradictory explanations and claim where they arise, is indicative of Morrison's preference for telling all sides of Piccola's story rather than hammering home one of them. In this, she is like other black women writers who, according to May Henderson, through their intimacy with the discourses of others, weave into their work competing and complementary discourses that seek to adjustute contemplating claims and witness concerns. It would be to miss the point than to read The Bluest Eye looking to assign blame. One of the great virtues of the book is its capacity to empathize and to allow its readers to empathize, something not possible in the absence of history and context with all of its characters, perhaps especially those who seem most irredeemable: Chloe, Soaphead, Church, and Pauline. Finally, though since The Bluest Eye and this project of representing African Americans focuses most specifically on the histories, arid bodies of black women, the novel's alternative perspective produces formally their complicated subjectivity in particular. As she shifts from young girl to older woman to black man to omniscient narrator, Morrison seems to move her examination of Piccola's life back and forth from the axis of race to that of gender. This process allows her in turn to move through the story as both insider and outsider in what May Henderson calls a contextual dialogue involving the hegemonic, dominant, and subdominant or ambiguously non-hegemonic discourses. At one point, Morrison writes as a black person among black people speaking to a white audience, at others as a woman among women speaking to men. The movement between these positions allows Morrison to see the other but also to see what the other cannot see, and to use this insight to enrich both our own and the other's understanding. Of course, these categories can be separated only artificially since, as Valerie Smith notes, the meaning of blackness in this country shapes profoundly the experience of gender, just as the conditions of womanhood affect ineluctably the experience of race. By doing so here, however, Toni Morrison enables the readers to witness structurally the complexity of black female subjectivity as she writes it back into a culture whose social and economic mechanisms would otherwise try to write it out. Thank you.